Morning. Welcome everybody to the Food Safety Project Roundtable this morning webinar. We are holding this webinar for a couple of reasons. One, the Northeast Center to Advance Food Safety tries to hold these regional roundtables and national roundtables on a fairly regular basis to inform everybody across the country what types of food safety projects are going on and encourage communication and collaboration throughout our network, but also across the country. And we thought it would be important to have this webinar now because there's been a food safety outreach program grant RFP released in April and the due date coming up in June. And so we thought the timing would be appropriate to inform everybody of what projects are in progress, underway, getting going, in hopes that it might spur ideas, communication, or inform potential applicants and applications that are going to be submitted next month. And so I'm thrilled that we've got 7 presenters today who are going to talk about some projects that they've got going on, and I encourage everybody to ask questions and join the conversation today as we go along. And I think that for the most part, we'll open it up for questions immediately following each individual presenter if there's some questions pertinent right away, but then also we'll have plenty of time at the end for questions and answers. So with that, I'll move it along and move to the first presenter, who is Marissa Schuh from Michigan. And I'll turn it over to you, Marissa. And your slide is up on the screen for everybody to see.
All right, thanks. My name is Marissa Schuh. I'm with Michigan State University Extension. I'm a field-based educator working with commercial vegetable growers in the southeast part of Michigan. I'm talking about some work I did in collaboration with Ben Phillips, who also does vegetables in Michigan, and Phil Coco. So our project is to help growers find a local-ish lab that can do one of the methods allowed under FSMA for water testing. There's more methods now than there were a year or two ago that are allowed, but these are still not necessarily tests a lot of labs do, and kind of talking through the lab and figuring out if they offer the test you want can be really hard to do. If you run into like someone manning the phone who isn't familiar with water testing, it can be kind of hard to figure out if the lab does the test or after. So we figured that out as the project kind of started with me and Ben calling labs in our areas, trying to create a local resource for growers, and then passing that on to support staff to do coverage in other parts of the state. We kind of expanded it, trying to reach labs in different ways. Ben handled a lot of this, where he started presenting at different association meetings that these environmental testing labs partake in. So he did presentations at the Michigan Environmental Lab Association, the Michigan Environmental Health Lab Association. So these are groups, are meetings where people who would do the water testing required by FSMA get together and talk about the latest in water testing. I'm not sure, but he did a short presentation about FSMA, why you start getting produce growers coming to your lab, asking about water testing. So we did some lab education as part of this. And then based on the feedback there, we decided to create a Google form that labs could self-report as doing one of the tests allowed by FSMA. We suspected we had some holes in the coverage map we as extension people had created. Digging through Michigan's Department of Environmental Quality, the DEQ, we found out that Michigan, the state, does yearly inspections on all the labs that would do these FSMA-approved tests. So we were able to get the contact information of the lab that the inspector inspects every year, and we sent the form then out to all of these labs, hopefully get more of them on our radar. So this form is up. You can see the links there. We're still getting entries. We sent it to the labs maybe a month ago, but we got an entry a day or two ago. So this thing we're constantly collecting information from. If anyone has used Google Forms before, if you're not familiar with it, people fill out the form. The form then goes into a Google Sheet, which is like an online Excel spreadsheet. I have this sheet set up to send me an email whenever someone fills out the form, and whenever I get an email to the form, I kind of start the next step of the process, which is the final product we want growers to look at, which is this Michigan Ag Water Map. So this map shows the locations of all the labs that we've either found or that have self-reported doing one of the FSMA-approved testing methods. Then tags to each location. We kind of have all the basic info a grower would need to figure out if that's a lab they can, that would kind of suit their needs. So do they need to sell bottles? Does the lab sell bottles? What tests do they do? Does the grower need to call ahead? How to get in contact with that lab? That kind of information can also be found for each lab listed in the map. So this is an ongoing, updating this map is something we do ongoing. I update it roughly weekly based on how many new submissions we get. So yeah, that's a resource we can easily plug into different places of the MSU website. Google Maps are very easy to embed on web pages. It's easy to send growers an email to the email with this link included. So it's been a good way to kind of get this information out in a succinct way. So that's all I have, but I'd be happy to take any questions.
Great, thanks, Marissa. Are there questions for Marissa?
I have a question.
Yep.
This is Amanda Kinchla from the University of Massachusetts. Thanks for sharing your project. It's very interesting. I actually have three questions. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. Do you happen, as part of this project, did you happen to build white papers for growers on the protocols for how to actually collect water sampling?
We don't have any of that built in with this project. There's different resources I've seen from different universities or like product safety alliance stuff, but we don't have that specifically attached to this as part of this project.
Sure. Yep. And how much effort does it take to manage the work that you've done? It sounds like you're getting great feedback of continuously adding. So how's the workload on that to managing it? And where I'm going here is, how easy do you think it would be to copy this type of approach with the national relevance, or breaking it off into regional relevance as well? Because I think this is a strong need, and I really appreciate your approach.
I think the Google Suite is if you're familiar with it, it's pretty easy to use. And I think if states adapting a similar approach structure like their spreadsheet, for example, in a consistent way, it would not be very hard to patch sheets together. So I think as long as, if we want to create larger, like multi-state resources, I think if the people in charge of those are in communication, it would not be hard to do. Even if you just had someone in each state responsible for updating that part of the map, when you're putting something into Google Maps, kind of each spreadsheet you put in as a layer. So if you had someone from each state kind of in charge of their own spreadsheet, they could just go in and update the information from their state without having to touch the sheets other people have imported. So I think there's potential there. We just have to make sure people are on the same page going in.
Sure. Well, and I think but you're familiar with the NECAFS clearinghouse. It just seems like a great platform to leverage the work you guys have done and making it consistent so that all extension can communicate in the same way. It's just, yeah, kudos to you guys. Thanks for sharing.
Hi, this is Kristen. Could I just have, when she asked about the workload question, could you give us an idea of how many hours we're talking about?
Figuring out what exactly you wanted the form to look like so that you wouldn't have to do any work in the spreadsheet when updating the Google map was probably the most time-intensive part, but that was all front-loaded in the winter when we weren't as busy as we are now. Now when I update the map, it maybe take 5 minutes, as long as there's nothing weird with the address. The only real issue I ran into was, for example, the most recent entry we got was from a lab in a very remote area of the UP where Google did not have the address they gave listed. So I just called the lab. They said they were a lab where they wanted people to call ahead anyway, so we just put the marker in the town. And if you're going to call ahead anyway, so you can get the specific address that way. So there are weird things that come up, but generally the maintenance has not taken very long. You just have to be at a computer to do it.
Did the calls and recruiting labs take a while?
Yes, it was much easier once we just started getting entries in the form, but each lab is different with who you go through and how much they know, and calling labs yourself takes a lot of time, and it takes you a couple calls to get good at it, because it can be very tricky to get through. The person answering the phone to the person who's really familiar with the testing, and if you're calling like a local water treatment lab or a local health department, they might know they do an enumerative E. coli test, but if you're trying to get like that method number, they might not even know what the method number is. So it can be tricky doing the calls yourself.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions for Marissa?
Can I ask one? Luke Laborde, Penn State. Can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead,
Oh,
Luke.
excellent. I'm sorry, I came in late, and so maybe this was already answered. Is this, can this format be applied to other states? For instance, can I pick up what you've done and create one for Pennsylvania that are using the same software or Google Maps approach and all that, so I don't have to reinvent the whole thing? Maybe you've already answered that. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, you could take our Google Sheet, create your own your Google form, create your own Google form. You could copy the exact answers, and you would end up with a spreadsheet that looks exactly the same as what we plug into our map.
So, being that this is a national effort, are you going to develop like a how-to guide for how other states might develop this step by step? Because I've tried Google Maps and it took a while to figure that out. So I was just wondering.
Yeah, potentially. Don Stokel and I have been talking about maybe doing a webinar where people are interested in doing this for their state. We could all sit down on a Zoom meeting and I could walk you through how we set ours up.
Okay. I think it's important that other people don't redo what you did, but can build on what you did from a national point of view. I see there's one up there in Duluth. We can't use that one.
There was a question that came into the chat box, asked if there was consideration of using GIS.
No one on our team really has experience using GIS, so we just use what we had, free software that's available to all our field-based staff.
Great. Any other questions? All right, great. Thanks, Marissa. I appreciate your time this morning.
Thanks.
And we'll go on to the next
I'll be
slide.
getting off the call now.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much.
I'm hopping off the call, so if anyone has a question, feel free to email me.
Great. Thanks, Marissa. We'll turn it over now to Amanda Kinchla at University of Massachusetts Amherst. Go ahead, Amanda.
Great. Thanks, Elizabeth. So the project we recently were awarded for FSOP is titled Food Safety Management Training for Small and Emerging Food Businesses, Integrating a Food Safety Culture from Concept to Commercialization. This is a project that's in collaboration with University of Rhode Island with co-PIs Nicole Richard and Lori Pravarnik. And as we think about shared use processing facilities and incubator kitchens, this has really created a great opportunity for small and emerging food businesses. But the audience has been really challenged in navigating their way through all of the facets within the product development cycle, the regulation, the food safety compliance, and balancing the product quality and still making sure it's safe and valuable, profitable, and all of those components that will make it its value and economic impact. So with that in mind, we noticed that there's a strong need to provide focused educational delivery, customized towards that food entrepreneur, so that they can understand the critical food safety considerations from concept, from that beginning idea, and see that all the way through to commercialization. And so this project is aimed at doing just that, of helping support the increased market opportunity for local value added, but looking at a very catered food safety training relevant to that audience of small and emerging food businesses, and try to foster a culture where we integrate food safety from the beginning idea session all the way through, so that entrepreneurs can be more successful. And with a lot of the work that I do here in Massachusetts, we do a lot of consults, and I'm sure that a lot of the other extension folks that are on the line have had these types of calls where after the fact they've come up with a product or they've come up with something, and then there's a huge gap of food safety knowledge that prevents them from going to market. because they have to revamp or reconsider things because of some sort of safety gap or something like that. So we're hoping that this type of program catering to that needs will help provide the technical assistance early on so that they'll have a stronger success in their entrepreneurial journey. And with the FSMA compliance and of preventive controls, trying to take those key concepts within the preventive control and put it in a lighter form to kind of expose this audience to that sooner rather than later, again, helps them build the foster of the food safety culture, but also have them build tools for success. So let's see, the key project. So this project started earlier this year, and there's 3 components to it. One is to conduct a needs assessment. This is specifically with understanding the food safety education and training opportunities necessary for these small and emerging food businesses to be successful and understand the FSMA guidelines and for their processing systems, and then build a curriculum and online training tools to help them be more successful. And this would include a variety of field pilot tests to make sure that the training does cater to the needs of this audience. Again, using the results from the needs assessment to kind of build the framework on those components. And then the third part would be implement a sustainable food safety program. And this would be including train the trainers and providing online tools so that a wider network of trainers have a capacity across the region. And this proposal was specifically for the Northeast, but our intention is that the framework could be leveraged across the country once we've got all the details ironed out. And the project overall, the PIs, as I mentioned, are Rhode Island and Massachusetts, but we've got a whole host of partners to help us see this through. We've got several different regional food processing centers in the Northeast, regulators with boards of health and processors, and actual entrepreneurs that are part of our team to help make sure that we get this right throughout the development so that we can really make it a valuable tool for this audience. So as I mentioned, this project just started earlier this year. So some of the big milestones that we've gotten so far is establishing an advisory board, and the draft of our needs assessment is being built. And we're planning to have the draft issued to our review pretty soon, actually, and with the plan to administer this needs assessment in September. And so this project the needs assessment again will be oriented to the Northeast, but I'd like to shamelessly put a shout out to all those that are on the line. Part of the problems or challenges that we're facing is trying to reach the audience. So the needs assessment is going to be targeted towards regional food processing center managers, the operators that are facilitating the training, as well as their respective stakeholders, the actual small and emerging food businesses, as the platform to disseminate. And so the figure I have here, the pie chart, is a figure that of those that we have identified as Northeast food hubs. And part of the efforts we're doing right now is to track all of these down so that we can maximize our needs assessment to all of those players. So that's pretty much where we're at for now.
Thanks,
Amanda.
Go ahead.
Sorry, this is Betsy. We should talk, and I think Lindsay Springer's on the call as well. But we should hand you at least the prelim data we have from our survey that was national, because we did include processor-specific questions in there.
Yeah.
So make sure you have those, because we used everything we got from the NECAFS meeting from the Northeast, and we tried to take it a little bit further. So just make sure we get you what we have. It's not final, but we have a couple of listening sessions under our belt, and we do have some data.
Awesome. So one other thing, Betsy, I'll talk to you offline, but Bruno is part of our advisory board, and he had mentioned that there could be some crossover from some of the other efforts that Cornell's working on. So I know we're going to be meeting later this month, and I'd like to take some time to talk to you more about how we can complement each other's efforts so that we can maximize outreach on these types of programs.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, you have a question in the chat box. Oh, go. Let me read the question that's in the chat box. How does your training speak to federal and state regulatory requirements relative to canned foods, meats, juice, and other items with specific food safety regulations? And how are you leveraging knowledge to help?
This project will not specifically talk. We'll have segments to address that of where you lay in terms of regulation to outline the fact that juice is a different regulation than meat or poultry, but it will be more of a wider scope. So some of it will talk about the regulations of where you fall, HACCP users versus preventive controls, USDA meat versus FDA, and those type of components. And so it will be broader concepts because a lot of entrepreneurs that we have, actually I have one this morning that wanted to do a smoked meat business and an acidified salsa company. They're stewing on ideas, but it just gives an example of entrepreneurs not being self-aware of how they're grossly different in the regulation. So it'll be more about how to think about the concepts of food safety ahead of time, and then part of the components will integrate some of this new concepts with preventive control, but it won't be specifically regulatory heavy in terms of specific compliance with like HACCP or something like that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think if, let me know, Barbara, who typed it in, if there's a follow-up to that. Was there someone else who had a question?
Yeah, no, Amanda, it's Priscilla from FDA Office of Partnerships. And if you need help with getting the word out, I don't know if you're already working with someone from Office of Partnerships, or if you want to give me a call. You know, we have various groups that could benefit from this outreach and who would probably be very interested. And so we've done a little bit, you know, like getting folks out via the Food Shield work group that we have. But I'm thinking that a little bit of feedback I've heard, I think it's because your name, the Northeast Center, it's true that a lot of people think, oh, we don't need to call in because that's the Northeast group. So they don't understand that this has national benefits. And but happy to help anyway.
That's wonderful. Yeah, and I should just caveat too that we do want to leverage what we know about the existing regulations with other foods, but we're trying to give a broader stroke of food safety knowledge. And I agree that while we're piloting this program in the Northeast, simply from a resource perspective, we do anticipate that the outputs will be nationally relevant. And I would greatly appreciate your input along the way. So thank you for offering to be a resource.
Okay, I'll shoot you an email.
Perfect. It's kinchla@umass.edu.
Okay.
Any other questions for Amanda?
Yes, or not really a question. My name is Roland McReynolds with the Carolina Farm Stewardship Association, and I guess I just would flag that we're working. We received a pilot project grant back in 2016 to work with NC State and Oklahoma State to do something similar in terms of developing a curriculum and online training tools serving this audience, but with a specific focus on.
So we're going to get on the road at 5.
Hello?
Okay.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? There's I think there's a hack on the line.
Sorry, if people could mute themselves locally, we're getting a little bit of feedback. Go ahead, Roland, you can keep going. Sorry about that.
Great, thanks. What I was about to say is that our project and curriculum are focused specifically on the low-risk food activity combinations that that are authorized on farm without preventive controls. So it is focused on GMPs training, both in person and through distance education to provide that GMP training for those low-risk food activity combinations. We have gone through the needs assessment process with our stakeholders and have pretty well have developed the curriculum material and are in the final kind of stages of actually developing the online training modules. So we also view that as being something with relevance outside of our region, and we certainly look forward to sharing information about that as well.
That's great. Thank you.
Great. Anything else for Amanda? Okay, we'll move on. Thank you, Amanda. To Mary Ellen Sheehan. Mary Ellen, are you on?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, you sound great. Thank you.
Okay. Let me just switch my audio. Okay. Hi, I'm Mary Ellen with the Northeast Organic Farming Association. And we've been working on a multi-state project between New York and Vermont on expanding food safety outreach and education, really focused at smaller and mid-sized farms. We've been working on this in conjunction with Cornell Cooperative Extension, NOFA Vermont, and University of Vermont. And I think I saw Robert on the call, so if you have anything to add here, feel free to jump in, Robert. And our project, we're about midway through now, and it's really been focusing on kind of using a range of strategies based on all the different partner groups to reach a different set of growers, pretty much where they're at. So we've been having, our Cornell partners have been doing a lot of FSMA training and 2-day PSA training and GAP training, and really helping people that need those certificates and need to be prepared for audits, be ready. And then we also have been doing a bunch of on-farm, like more informal workshops for growers who might be exempt or might be new to food safety. So just integrating that kind of training in a situation where they might be interested in coming, and we can kind of entice them in by a really exciting farm and then put in a food safety training module so they'll have something they can take home from that. So that's kind of like our approach and methods. And so we've done also a lot of like one-on-one technical assistance. I think both folks at UVM, the NOFAs, and Robert and Craig have been doing a lot of like working with farms, getting them ready for audits. We get a lot of questions at the NOFAs from farms not sure, you know, calling in one at a time on what they have to do, if they're covered by the rule or not. We've been doing a lot of winter workshops, and we're kind of midway through planning our summer field days and getting those going. Just kind of a different, like a whole spectrum of getting people involved. This last year in the field, we've been trying to get a sense of what the growers are looking for, which is kind of evolving, you know, each January as new growers are getting more aware of what's happening. We've been seeing a lot of interest in smaller growers who are maybe changing their market mix and doing more wholesale marketing rather than retail marketing. So we have more and more smaller farms that are approaching us. We've been finding really good success integrating the training into sessions if the sessions have a topic that growers are interested in. So over at NOFA Vermont, they've been really tying food safety training and like your wash and pack sheds with lean farming, and trying to tie together the economics of being food safe and really drawing farmers in. We've had a lot of success with tying in with like wholesale channels and opening new markets for growers. And then also there's a lot of interest in like harvest and packing efficiency. So we've had a couple field days so far, and we're going to have a number more this summer. We're just looking at going through crop by crop and how to do it efficiently and safely, kind of tying those together. And there also been our partners over Cornell and UVM have been doing a lot of like handouts and fact sheets that we've been able to share with growers. We've been getting a lot of good feedback from our members. Also, like reaching out to the plain communities, it's great to have something that we can print up and mail to the growers, especially looking at like wash pack shed design and like what kind of surfaces you can use. We've been getting more and more questions each year about that. And then I think on the organic front, one of the things that's part of this project with the two NOFAs is really looking at like how to find the overlap between, farms who are going through the certification process, but who also, want to be FSMA compliant or want to do either GAPs or CAPs over in Vermont. So Laura Nunziata over at NOFA Vermont has been doing a lot of research into that and kind of seeing how can we integrate it? Is there any way to like facilitate the two? And we actually just had some of our NOFA Vermont certification staff take the food safety training. So that's kind of our big push now, is like trying to find out, is there paperwork that we can somehow get to go for both FSMA inspections and then also for organic inspections. Yeah, and so this summer we have a ton of field days lined up on deck, a lot of them with like a workshop component that we're really excited about. And we actually are going to be filming. We have a professional film crew coming to all the field days. So we're hoping at the end to have like the workshops and all the different modules up on our website so that people can see, if they're not able to make the day, get there and see like what's going on. So I don't know if anybody has any questions.
Thanks, Mary Ellen. Are there questions for Mary Ellen? So we just had one come into the chat. Will or are your fact sheets developed, particularly the FSMA compliance and organic compliance, be available on the NECAFS clearinghouse?
I think they should be. I'd have to check with, I don't know if Robert's put his one up. I think that Chris Callahan has put the ones that UVM has developed up on the clearinghouse. And we definitely, anything that we get together for the organic, we'll definitely send right over there. And we're hoping by this fall, early winter, to have some sort of guidance to help growers.
Great, thanks. And I have a question. So you're talking about collecting information while and after you're doing these trainings, and I'm wondering, is that how you're determining the additional add-on you were talking about, doing sort of more in-depth packing workshops or lean pack shed type of things? Is that how you're determining that, or how are you determining the need for these specialized trainings?
Oh yeah. Yeah, we've been doing like we do an evaluation at each of our field days and our workshops. So kind of on the evaluations, that's the feedback we've been getting, and requests from our members. So we have great members who are good at calling the office and telling us what they want. Yeah, so we've been kind of like trying to tailor the program. Like if we run a program and don't get a huge response for it, and we run another program when we get a big response, kind of tailoring it that way. So this summer, like we're doing a lot of, we're doing one big field day on infrastructure, because that's something we've been hearing a lot, like tying in, if you're going to be making infrastructure upgrades and improving like your irrigation system, like what sort of, ag water consideration should you be taking in to account? Like what sort of, like, there's no point in building a $50,000 pack shed and not having it be FSMA compliant. So it's a series, I would say, of both formal evaluations and then informal discussions with our members. So just trying to find that balance. Like I feel like with a lot of the smaller growers, we've found that we almost need a carrot for folks to come into the training. And if they can come out with, I can save money by retooling my shed in this way, they're much more excited about hearing about the food safety part. But we also had a really good success. We did a series of workshops this winter that were just like Food Safety 101 for exempt growers. And we had a ton of success and a lot of requests for doing that around the state more. And it was just like a 2-hour presentation and then a half an hour with the NISDAM regulators came and talked. And it was just answering people's questions. And it was a few growers are affected by the rule more than others, but everybody was very happy about it. Like it was kind of a stress lessening sort of thing. So we're looking at maybe this fall doing a series of just like very informal things around the state.
Great, thanks. Any other questions for Mary Ellen? Okay.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Mary Ellen. All right, I'll turn it over to Betsy Bin from Cornell now.
Hi. This is a project. My co-PIs are Travis Chapin from University of Florida and Trevor Seslow from University of California, Davis. The idea really sprung from the fact that we've been traveling around the country doing on-farm readiness review pilots. And when growers are asked what they're using to train their workers, a lot of them cite the the Cornell video that we did years ago, Fruits, Vegetables, and Food Safety, Health and Hygiene on the Farm. And with new FSMA requirements, that video needs to be updated to include some of the new caveats. The other thing that has been not completed is a packing house training video for our operations that are just doing packing houses. So essentially what we did is we wrote a project with the idea that we would capture diverse commodities and production practices across the U.S. so that the video could really represent lots of different farms so people would feel comfortable using it. It, of course, will be in a multilingual format. And again, with our collaborators, we intend to have farms and packing houses participating from Florida, California, and New York, again, to cross a bunch of different commodities. So I guess I did the problem first, but the current video just needs to be updated. It's been a number of years, but a lot of folks are using it. So where are we at with this? Well, we've found a video crew. We're updating the script to make sure it captures everything that has changed and is reflected in the video. And we, in addition to the typical format, which is this video was 15 minutes, we intend to do additional shorter videos and use those for additional education and outreach related to the produce safety rule. Those of us working in this area, as we were just discussing the needs of small growers, the needs for videos talking about cleaning and sanitizing, water management, all of that. So we intend to capture a little bit more video than would be necessary for just a straight training video and to turn it into some additional educational opportunities.
Thanks, Betsy. Are there questions for Betsy?
Just a quick question, Betsy. This is Londa in YDK. I should know this answer, but I assume there's a cost with buying the video, or there will be a cost then?
Well, how we did it when we did the first video was whatever money was left in the grant, we used to print the video and distribute it. And then once the grant money's gone, we do print for reprinting. So the current video is $20, I think. It goes up because of when the handling goes up at the bookstore, but the goal is to just make it widely available. I think we'll also probably try to do some streaming as well. We haven't quite decided on that. We've had a few discussions about it, but growers tend to like something they can carry around. As one grower told us recently at a training, his wife wouldn't let him in the house with the muddy boots, so he trained everybody in his minivan, in their video screen, so in the minivan. So I think growers like to have something they can put in to a DVD and show it. But I think we're going to look at a couple of different options, and I welcome feedback on that if you guys have thoughts.
There's another question, Betsy, about estimated time for completion and becoming available.
We're really hoping by next winter. So we're planning on shooting the video this year and then wrapping it up and having it out next winter.
Yeah, and I also got another chat of support for the streaming idea. Sounds good.
Yeah. It's, you know, for the growers that are in rural areas where they don't have very good connections, streaming isn't a good idea. So I think we need to have a couple of different formats is some of the concerns we have.
Other questions for Betsy? Okay, great. Thanks, Betsy. And we'll move on to the next presenter, Londa.
Yeah, so mine is quite, my reason for presenting today is quite different than everybody else. I'm still very much just thinking about submitting a proposal. So I thought I would present today kind of first to make me think about it a little bit more before the June 7 deadline, but also to see if there might be anybody else interested in working together in this. Just a brief background, so I actually have a food safety outreach project on the produce safety side right now that we got in 2016, and I work a lot in produce safety right now, but so I work in both Kansas and Missouri, and on the Kansas side, we have really good support for FSPCA. We have, a great trainer, and we have all that. But on the Missouri side, we don't have anybody else in the university system that's currently doing FSPCA trainings, and we don't have a process authority in Missouri. And so, anyway, we're working on hiring somebody, but that hasn't happened yet. And so, so I just wanted to. So I think I'm going to try to submit a food safety outreach program proposal to try to help just strengthen our ability to be able to provide FSPCA trainings in Missouri. Right now it's just consultants that are doing it in Missouri. We don't have anybody within the university system. So I kind of wanted to present today just to see if there might be other states interested in working together with us, if there's anybody else that kind of needs to beef up their support too. So I don't have anything like super developed yet of what we're planning to do, but just to be able to start providing this training and to be able to provide technical assistance to food processors in Missouri as well. And I'll just leave it at that. But so, like I said, for me, it's really just trying to develop that capacity. Anyway, it's great to have. We have a lot of good capacity now on the produce safety side, but we really need to develop capacity on the FSPCA side in Missouri in particular. So
great, thanks, Londa. Any questions or discussion points for Londa on this proposal idea? Or recommendations from folks who maybe have done something similar?
Yeah, and by the way, Amanda's project sounds great, working with the food hubs and the incubator kitchens and that sort of thing. Like we have a decent number of those as well in Missouri too, that we could provide some more assistance to. So it's great to hear of all the other resources that are available.
Mm-hmm. Come in.
Any other questions for Londa? And you can see her email address is here too. So if you think of something after or want to follow up, please reach out.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Londa. All right, let's move on to the next presenter. It's Lisa McKeague from University of Massachusetts Extension. Go ahead, Lisa.
Hi, that's me. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, go ahead.
Great. Okay, so it's sort of similar to Mary Ellen's project, although maybe on a slightly smaller scale. I have a FSOP community outreach project that I'm in the second year of. So the idea here was really to get organizations around the state, buy locals, other ag organizations like NOFA, anyone who had a lot of contact with growers, where those organizations or those people might be the first place someone turned for info, outside of UMass, kind of all on the same page about what was going to happen with FSMA and the produce rule, and how that was going to be implemented in Massachusetts. So we have a lot of small and medium-sized growers in the state, and many aren't covered, many are qualified exempt, but they'll still be affected by the rule in some way. And growers definitely have a lot of questions. They've heard so many different messages since FSMA was passed in 2011, and they've were anxious, and also have a lot of buyers asking for certification of some kind. So the idea was to really make sure that as many growers as we could reach were at least aware of fundamental farm food safety practices and how FSMA was going to affect them one way or the other. And we wanted to make sure that growers had the same access to resources and support and training, regardless of whether they needed to comply, so that they're aware of best practices, can access different markets. And Massachusetts is kind of in an uncommon position, I think, in the US, in that we have a state audit program. We've had one for many years, the Commonwealth Quality Program. It's kind of an alternative to USDA GAP. And UMass and the Department of Ag, MDAR, who administers the audit program, have a long history of working together to deliver produce safety education. So Mike Botello, who I'm sure many of you know, and my predecessor here at UMass, Rich Bonanno, for many years delivered trainings in support of Commonwealth quality and also USDA GAP. So with this project, we're continuing to deliver trainings together. Mike and I deliver trainings together, and I work closely with Mike on, and now his expanded team, to deliver trainings and also just to kind of stay up to date on regulatory changes as they're kind of implementing their state audit program, their state inspection program. So now the trainings that we're doing, Mike and I are doing these trainings together using the PSA curriculum, but we're covering also this state voluntary audit program, CQP, and kind of how that will function as both the structure for inspections and audits for people needing market access. So there's definitely the potential for confusion about where a grower might fall between those voluntary and regulatory scenes, and a lot of the same acronyms are thrown about and used in both cases. And so I think the need for there to be a really consistent message across the state is what we recognized and kind of inspired this project. So we really wanted to focus on basic understanding of gaps and how people can practically implement things, whether or not they're covered. I wanted to get that training to as many people as possible, because a lot of the growers in the state, I think, had never received any kind of food safety training before. And one of the important things about CQP is that it has always and will continue to provide technical support and also access to grant funds within the state to help folks with infrastructure improvements and accessing things like new bins and wash stations and things like that. So what we wanted to do was create an outreach network. So a representative from each of these, you can see on the map here on this slide, we kind of tried to cover the state as much as possible so that all these kind of little pockets of particularly smaller growers, but hopefully all the growers that we could potentially reach in the state are covered by some extent by these sort of niche organizations. And so a representative for each of these organizations was identified to receive PSA training, and we are a little network. We've met in person and we meet over the phone so that I can get feedback about the needs in their areas among their kind of niche audiences and base our outreach on those needs that have been identified, and then also make sure that all these representatives and these organizations get updates, regulatory updates about what's happening in terms of FSMA and how the CQP thing is going to work. And yeah, just make sure that we're all on the same page, particularly at this critical point with the establishment of this Massachusetts Produce Safety Inspection and Market Access Program, which I think is kind of the new official name of the CQP program. So like I said, Mike and I have been co-hosting these trainings, and we've been doing them co-hosted by each of these organizations. So they use their existing networks to advertise the programs. They have us speak at their conferences and get event notices and regulatory updates out to their audiences. So it really helps us to expand our outreach abilities. And then hopefully with their PSA training, they're also able to answer questions directly if people call them or direct growers appropriately to answers. And that would be to Mike or to me. And the idea is that, if someone calls CMAP on the south coast of Massachusetts, they get the same answer that they might call if they called Berkshire Grown, to just really kind of reduce that confusion, reduce anxiety, and make sure that folks know about all the resources that are available to them, including those grant funds and the technical support that will be provided regardless of the scale that you're at. And the idea is to, just kind of even out the playing field among growers so that there wasn't a disparity between folks who are fully covered and maybe getting a lot of attention because of that, and folks who weren't, and didn't want those people to fall off the radar. So one of the, I'm not really looking at the slide here, but so that was kind of our approach, was to do these trainings and to do them in conjunction with MDAR, and also to improve our resources. So to develop a website that's really accessible to people, to help people navigate where they fall in terms of their coverage with FSMA, but also how they can utilize CQP. And if they aren't covered and don't want to utilize CQP, still have access to information to make improvements on their farm and understand best practices. So we're deeply in the process of reorganizing and improving that website right now. And then the third component of it is these on-farm workshops to really help people with some practical stuff that's identified. You know, the PSA is kind of a broader view, and then helping the people come to these workshops to really fine-tune some of the other more specific stuff that they would need to learn. So results so far, we've done 8 PSAs, a bunch of people trained, and I've included on the slide here some percentages of the, these are from the PSA evaluations, where at least of the people who filled out the evaluation, we had 68% have never had any GAPS training before, half the people were beginning farmers, and then a very large number were either exempt or would qualify for exemption. So that was sort of the idea, is to expand that training to these folks who likely had never received training before, and we wanted to make sure that they were all kind of in the fold. And we've done a few Twilights so far, 3 so far on irrigation water, pack sheds, training, and SOPs, and then we've got a few others in the works. And those were topics that were identified by growers who attended training. So we did some surveying at each of the trainings that we did in the first year to ask people what topics they were most interested in and which aspects of the rule they were least confident in, and really try and do workshops that address some of those questions. We've also done a bunch of these other kind of short programs where we just were getting people up to speed with some of the lingo and how it was going to work. And again, to kind of just ease that fear that I think a lot of people were feeling about what was going to happen when FSMA came down. That's kind of it. In year 2, I'm going to do some surveys of the people who've attended the trainings and workshops to just assess what they've learned and if they've implemented anything new based on what they've learned, and sort of the overall impact that we've had. And all this work, I think, will continue beyond the period of this grant, but it really helped to establish a farm food safety program at UMass. And so we were able to make a lot of good connections around the state, and I think create what I think I feel pretty comfortable with in terms of where at least this other tier of educators who aren't necessarily really steeped in food safety, and they're not necessarily trainers in the PSA curriculum or anything, but they are really able to at least answer questions in a knowledgeable way and direct people appropriately so that we can create a calm environment. Yeah, I think that's it.
Great, thanks, Lisa. So I have a question. You were mentioning that when growers call these other organizations that they can answer and they get a consistent message. Are you doing continuing education with these folks, or was it just one training that they just went to the PSA training and now you feel confident in what they can do, or how are you managing that with messaging?
Yeah, that's a good question. We're definitely still in touch. We've had couple of in-person meetings as a group, well, actually as kind of 2 groups, because it was hard to get everybody in the same place. We did kind of an Eastern Mass and Western Mass group where Mike Vitello was there and he brought all of his new inspectors, and so everybody got to meet and ask a lot of questions about what an inspection will look like and all of this stuff. And so we're in connection that way, and we've had a few conference calls, and then I'm in touch with a lot of these folks on a pretty regular basis at this point, where there's not a lot of informal meetings beyond the couple in-person meetings that we've had and a couple conference calls, but we are all quite familiar with each other in a way that we didn't used to be. And so I will, if something new happens, I'll send an email out to all the folks that I have at these organizations to say, FYI, this is what's happening, or here's an article that I think would be useful for your folks. And I have been getting a lot of calls from someone at CISA, or I have actually been working with a number of these organizations. We've been co-hosting all these programs together. So they'll kind of talk about what they're doing. A few of them have like food safety outreach projects or other projects going on. And so we kind of wanted to, again, make sure to get ahead of them, make sure we were all on the same page again about what was happening here, so that their work was consistent with that. And so we have had a lot of, beyond the formal meetings, informal conversations. And they'll, at their conferences and stuff, again, we'll have me or Mike come and give these regulatory updates. And so there is kind of this, just a new relationship among us all.
Great, thanks. Any other questions for Lisa? Okay, thanks, Lisa. And we'll go ahead to the last presenter for today, Phil Tocco from Michigan State. And Phil, just let me know when you want me to advance your slide.
Absolutely. I apologize in advance. I now see the error of my ways in breaking this up into multiple slides. I thought putting all that text on one slide is going to suck, and I realize now I should have just done it. So apologies in advance for that. This project, working with safe use of animal-based soil amendments, grew out of the work that was done by the Produce Safety Alliance in hosting the BSAAO summits that happened both in Geneva and then in Georgia and then in Texas. And several of the folks in Michigan that we all partnered together attended some of those workshops and really noticed that there was a lot of information there that could be brought back to growers. And particularly, we have a bunch of smaller growers that basically use soil amendments and don't recognize the risks associated with them. So and some of them even don't even recognize that they're using biological soil amendments. There's a lot of fish emulsion used. There's a lot of fish guts used, and most folks don't recognize that that's a potential hazard. So there are a lot of partnering organizations that work together in Michigan, including our state resource conservation districts, Michigan State University Extension, and then Michigan Department of Ag and Rural Development. But also we have a large small farm coalition called Michigan Food and Farming Systems that tends to help, that's been doing food safety for a number of years with us, partnering with us to create sort of a network around the state. And they joined us too in hearing about what happened at the BSAAO summits and then wanting to take part in something a little more meaningful locally. So some of the things that we saw were that small farms used biological soil amendments and didn't realize they were a hazard at all. They didn't understand the risks associated with them, and then they maybe didn't even understand what was composting and what wasn't composting. Next slide, please. Thanks. So one of the things, so then out of that, we thought of developing a 2-day workshop to address some of these concerns. On day one, we basically were thinking through the first half of the day was to do an in-class portion where we covered concepts around composting, where the risks were, how to analyze the hazards around siting a compost pile, and how to effectively compost. The afternoon of that day one, then we took folks to an effective composting facility where they could see composting in action. How could you tell, one thing from another? How can you tell whether or not you were doing a good job composting? And really understanding like how to take a temperature of a compost pile, how to judge moisture in a compost pile so that they got a really good solid understanding of the composting process. And then there was a second day, a second half day, that was much more hands-on workshop around hands-on in the sense of paperwork, looking at how do we write policies and procedures specifically tailored to our farm to be able to address some of these concerns in a food safety manual. So, and in some cases, we didn't have that second half day because it turned out we had some really interesting folks attend. Next slide, please. So we planned 5 of these programs around the state, and we've completed 3. The last 2 are next week. But the first 3 that we did, we had an attendance of 29 participants in those 3 workshops. What was interesting is the size and scale of the folks that attended went anywhere from I'm a small market gardener who's looking to expand a little bit on a second lot, to I have 500 acres of blueberries and I use compost. So it literally ran the gamut. And in one of the classes we held, we didn't have that policies and procedures workshop. We simply followed up that compost site visit with just talking about the best practices around SOPs in a very brief fashion, because most everyone that was in that class not only already had policies and procedures in place, but they were actively being gap audited for years because that was the large growers that attended that workshop. We really didn't expect to see large growers come to this workshop, so it was pretty cool that they came. In general, some of the respondents to our survey, we saw we had about 60% response rate. 83% really increased their knowledge of soil amendment requirements. 88% really increased their knowledge on identifying soil amendment risks on their farm, and then 81% increased the understanding of where to find local resources. Really, it helped us create some networks where growers could figure out who to tap for information. And some of the sites so far that we've literally been in downtown Detroit for one of our workshops. And our last workshop is actually going to be in a remote part of the Upper Peninsula. So we literally are running the entire state with these 5 workshops. This was funded through a sub-award of our state cap grant. So that's really what funded the outreach efforts. And with that, I'm open for questions.
Thanks, Phil. Are there questions for Phil? So I have a question, Phil. Was your target audience for this specifically growers? And if so, did then having that wide range of audience kind of impact the way that the class ran when you had sort of home composters all the way up to like the bigger growers that you mentioned?
We did target growers, and to be honest, where we saw the smaller folks was we actually had one of these in downtown Detroit. And it was marketed to, so there's a fairly large network of market growers in Detroit. There's actually a network of about 1,500 market growers in the city. So and we network through our local channels. And those folks, you know, they were market gardeners. They sell their product that they grow, and they're using compost in some way, shape, or form. What we really didn't anticipate, and because we used our channels for small growers to market this, we weren't really marketing it to large growers. And when the large growers showed up, and like an entire class of large growers, it kind of really threw us for a loop, and it definitely changed how we presented things. Does that help?
Yeah, it does. Thanks. And so are you planning another series of these types of workshops?
We're not sure. I mean, there's a lot of other topics that we really need to drill down into. We could spend 2 days on water, which, you know, might make some folks crazy, but I'm sure some people would appreciate 2 days of water. There are other topics I think we're going to need to work on with each successive iteration. One of the upshots of this too is we actually brought in some our Michigan State University Extension film crew, and they did tape some of what happened. So the hope is that we'll develop some online videos that we can then deploy for folks to get further information on as well.
Great, thanks. Other questions specifically for Phil? Okay, great.
Thanks.
Well, that's the end of our, go ahead, Phil.
Just saying thanks.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, that's the end of our presentation. So we'll open it back up for discussion and questions to everybody who was presenting. If there are other questions or just points of discussion or comments folks would like to make, the floor is open. So please feel free to speak up. Okay. Well, I will mention too that if you haven't been, the NECAFS Clearinghouse was mentioned, and all of the FSOP projects that have been awarded in 2016 and 17, the project descriptions with the PIs have been uploaded to the NECAFS Clearinghouse, and so you can go on there and just search. If you just enter FSOP into the keyword search section on the search tab, you will pull up a full list of all of these projects from across the nation, not just the Northeast. And that way you can go on there, read the description of what projects are underway and get a sense for work that's being done, and reach out to those folks who are doing those projects if you're planning to submit an application or thinking about work for yourself that you'd like to do moving forward. So I just wanted to emphasize that all of that information is on the clearinghouse if you're interested in looking for it. And are there any other questions or points of discussion before we end today? Yep, go ahead.
Emma, and you said they are in clearinghouse. Would you give me the website, please? How do I get it? Is it on Food Shield?
Yeah, it's no, it's on the NECAFS website, and I'll post that into the chat box right now.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, if not, thank you everybody for joining today, and I'd like to especially thank the presenters for taking their time, and enjoy the rest of the afternoon. And thanks so much, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.